Howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it's time to talk Path of Exile. I wanted to put together a quick guide on the things that I learnt from going from a player that was fairly new to endgame into a player that can amass a modest amount of currency during a typical league. I'm not someone that has multiple mirrors, but I am someone that can afford to purchase a Headhunter if I want to, can afford to pick up pretty much anything except for the absolute top chase uniques with powerful corruptions on them. So, things like a 6-link, things like a powerful Shaper or Elder items, I can generally afford those, helmet enchants, all sorts of things like that. And there's been a couple of things that I've learnt from going from the sort of player that finished a league with 4 Exalted Orbs and 150 Chaos Orbs to having the sort of 50 to 60 Exalts in my currency tab that you see here, plus plus a few more Exalts worth of premium divination cards. So there's 8 copies of the Nurse Divination card, that's another 6 Exalts, and a few other things like one of the At3 Security cards, and a few other items that all add up over time. Now, the key things that I've learned in this have been, firstly, be very careful, be very frugal with crafting. I have used almost no Exalted Orbs in terms of using them for their main ability, the ability to enchant a rare item with an additional random modifier. I certainly use lower crafting orbs regularly, but Exalted Orbs I'm extraordinarily frugal with. Thinking back, I believe I've only ever slammed items twice in the entire time that I've played Path of Exile. During the Betrayal League, I have not slammed an item once using an Exalted Orb. I have used the special crafting bench that you can get through the Betrayal mechanics that mimics the effect of an Exalted Orb, but I have not slammed an item once in this league. I think that using crafting orbs frivolously for the chance of a big payoff is something that is done too much by players that try to get themselves to a large amount of currency and end up failing. Generally, the only time I will slam an item with an Exalted Orb is once I have looked up the probabilities of getting a favourable roll and worked out an actual cost-benefit analysis before I do it. So, for instance, if I have a 3 Exalt Shield and I decide that I have an 8% chance of improving it to a 20 Exalt Shield by slamming it, and one consolation outcome that's also 8% that'll raise it to a 4 Exalt Shield, and then everything else will leave it just at 3 Exalts as it is now, I'll go ahead and I'll do that, because the 8% chance to gain 17 Exalts outweighs the 84% chance to waste my Exalted Orb. However, if it was only a 2% chance for that shield to increase to a 20 Exalt Shield, then I would not use it. And almost always you'll find that that's going to be the case. So that's my first tip, is don't slam unless you have consulted the probabilities, and you can do that from a variety of websites that have data mined information as to how likely each affix is. If you're not familiar with those websites, never slam an item, never use an Exalted Orb for its original function. If you are familiar with them, then do the maths and let the maths guide you. Don't just go ahead and do it. Most of my currency in a league typically comes from trying to get to maps early. You'll notice here that I've got a sizable amount of maps. And early on in a league, I will try to push into the highest tier of maps that I can. The reason for this is that very early in a league, a large amount of items that will become worthless will hold a sizable trade value. So if I have a quick look here, I believe this is the one This is an item that I looted very early in the league, and it hasn't sold. You'll see it's sitting in my 10 Chaos tab. I've picked up this Shaper, influenced item level 76 steel circlet that doesn't have very good mods. I was using it for a short period, that's why I crafted 59 life on it. And I was just using it because I had nothing better. And the cold damage to spells was nice, the lightning resistance was nice. Anyways, very early in a league, Shaper and Elder influenced items can sell for quite extraordinary prices compared to what they'll sell for later in the league. At this point of the league, a steel circlet, unless it was item level 86, it's just simply not going to sell unless it has extraordinarily good mods on it, or a labyrinth enchant. However, it's still in my 10 Chaos tab because this used to be a 20 Chaos tab, and when I first got to maps, I was just throwing everything that had potential in here. This one didn't sell, but most of the things in this did sell, or at least a large enough percentage of them that I'm not particularly worried about missing out on a couple of the others. Another thing you'll notice here is that I have a 5 Alchemy Orb tab that is currently actually not public. That means that these items are not visible for sale. I don't bother with small trades. I do very early on in a league. I had a 5 Alchemy and an 8 Chaos tab, and also a 4 Chaos tab, which is also deactivated but had all of my Loreweave rings in it. These tabs are something that are only useful very early on, and that once you've got yourself about 150 Chaos Orbs worth of net wealth, I would strongly recommend that you deactivate these tabs. You don't want distractions when mapping unless the distraction is worth it, and a 5 Alchemy trade or a 4 Chaos trade is not. 8 Chaos can be, and I've currently got this as activated, although I don't expect I'll get very many takers because it's mostly just junk that I thought might have had some appeal. My next tip is to, early on in a league, if you find an item that has some potential, and I'll take here as an example this Crusader plate. I was using it for a period of time. It's 6 socketed already, which is nice, however it is not 6 linked. It has an enormous amount of life on it. You'll see here that it's got 115 life, which is split between the Nautilus prefix and the Athletes prefix, and it also has the Mastercrafted 8% life on it, because I was using it for a whole period. This makes for an item that early in a league has a lot of potential for someone to really desperately want, because it's just a massive upgrade. They've been using Tabula Rasa, or maybe they've just been using some garbage item that dropped for them way back when they were clearing Act 8, and just happened to have the right colours and the right resist that they needed at that time, so they were using it. It was getting them through, and then boom, they've gotten into maps and they're starting to get outclassed. They need more life, they need more resist, and they see something like this. Items that have real potential to be wanted, early on I priced them quite high. This tab that you're looking at now, although it's currently priced at 11 Chaos, I started it at 25. It would have my various higher quality Abyss Jewels, it had most of my Shaper and Elder items, even ones like this that had no potential, and every time I had an item with potential, I threw it in here. Then, every 10 or 12 maps, and we're talking at this point that the league's 8 to 10 hours old, every 10 to 12 maps that I do, I just tick it down by a Chaos, the price that I'm asking. And some things would sell, some things wouldn't. That was all fine, I would just keep going. The next thing that I'd point out is that it's become common wisdom amongst players early in a league to trade all your Chaos Orbs into Exalted Orbs. And while this works, Chaos Orbs depreciate very quickly in a league, whereas an Exalt is always an Exalt. A Chaos Orb will fall from being 5% of an Exalt in the first hour of the league to being 2% of an Exalt by about 6 hours into the league, and then it will fall and fall and fall. And at the time that I'm recording this video, they're about 1/2 of 1% of an Exalted Orb. So Chaos Orbs crash in price over time, and so do most of the non-Exalt currencies. However, it's important to note that some currencies are of much more appeal once players have built up their characters and have a lot of currency to invest. Currently, Exalted Orbs are the best example of this, a best known example, so everyone will trade all their Chaos Orbs into Exalted Orbs early in the league and think that this is the best thing they can do. However, you would have done far, far better if instead at the start of the league you had bought an enormous amount of Orbs of Annulment. Annulment Orbs are absolute garbage at the start of a league. They're very rare drops though, and not enough of them drop to meet demand. So, early in a league, purchasing Orbs of Annulment from other players is an outstanding way of turning of basically preserving your character's buying power as the market changes over a league, as more and more players start going from being from the initial phases of gearing where they're willing to pay any amount for garbage gear that will get them into higher tier maps, up to the point where they feel that their character is almost complete and the only thing that can make them better is to seek an almost mirror tier item. Orbs of Annulment will increase in value against the Chaos Orb standard more than Exalted Orbs will. The other item that I was not able to pick up any of this league that will appreciate in similar stats is fractions of either a mirror or a mirror of Calandra or a Headhunter, the Headhunter unique belt. So the two fractions of those that are, the two fractions for each of them that are most relevant. For the Mirror of Calandra, there is the Mirror Shard, which is often available to pick up on trade early in the league for 200 Chaos Orbs or less. At the point that I'm recording this video, they're worth about 1,000 Chaos Orbs, so that's something that has tremendously shot up in price. And the other one is the Headhunter unique belt. The time I'm recording this video, it's actually just fallen from 57 Exalted Orbs down to 50, and there are 3 divination cards that can make up a Headhunter. There is the Doctor, which is 1/8 of a normal Headhunter. There is the Shrine. There is the card that drops in the Shrine, the Fiend, which is 1/11 of a corrupted Headhunter. And there is the Nurse divination card, which drops from the Tower map and is 1/64 of a Headhunter. So 8 copies of the Nurse makes 1 copy of the Doctor, 8 copies of the Doctor makes a Headhunter belt. The Nurse divination card is an extraordinarily good investment early in a league, considerably better than the Exalted Orb. And you can see that if you have a look at the historical prices during this league, the value of the Nurse went from being about 35% of an Exalted Orb early in the league to currently being about 75% of an Exalted Orb at the moment, although that can fluctuate a little bit. The other items that are worth picking up early in a league are Vaal Orbs. Vaal Orbs are something that you will use a lot while you're mapping, but they're something that is of marginal use when you're really struggling at the start of a league. As a result, lots of players are quite happy to trade them off. They'll be going for as little as 0.6, 0.7 Chaos, and consistently by the end of the league, they'll pop up to 1.6 Chaos Orbs each, or be considerably higher if there is some league challenge that encourages you to massively use Vaal Orbs. In the Betrayal League, there is no example of this. In the previous league, however, there was a challenge to run, I believe it was 300 corrupted maps. So that required 300 Vaal Orbs if you were just doing it by yourself, and 50 if you were doing it in a group of 6 that was doing rotations. So again, very, very large very large drain on Vaal Orbs in the economy. Additionally, an enormous amount of Vaal Orbs get used when players corrupt items and then decide after corrupting them that they need to link them. For instance, if I was to take a unique item, let's just take for example the unique item Greed's Embrace. If I can find, I know I do have several of these. Greed's Embrace, just for argument's sake. If I was to take this and pop it on the Elva's Corruption Altar, the special one that appears in the Temple of Atzoatl, and if I was to get an absolutely god tier corrupt on it, it then wouldn't be of any use on its own. It's a, it's a 3-socket, 2-linked item. No one's going to use it. But if you 6-link it and then change its colors to something useful, it could be very, very valuable. However, the cost to 6-link an item once it's corrupted is literally thousands of Varlorbs. And whilst people aren't going to bother doing that with Greed's Embrace, if instead it was a Lore Weave, or if it was something else that's incredibly valuable like a Farrell's Fur, then all of a sudden that player is going to want to source an enormous amount of Varlorbs. It doesn't take very many people buying them to transform the economy on them either. So yeah, they're my tips for early league. You want to be you do not want to be caught holding the ball on lots of Chaos Orbs. Keep enough, obviously, for your own mapping purposes, and keep a bit of a buffer for items that you want to purchase that are denominated in Chaos. But I would generally suggest that you don't keep more than 200 Chaos Orbs during the early days of the league, if you've been able to farm that many. Of course, you may not be able to. And whenever people trade to you in Chaos Orbs, don't so much feel that you need to convert them into Exalts. Convert them instead into Orbs of Annulment, Mirror Shards, if you can afford a Mirror Shard. Certainly no dramas if you can't. Varlorbs, the Nurse Divination cards, and again, these two only if you can afford them, the Doctor Divination card and the Fiend Divination card. The last thing that I would consider trying to acquire very early in the league is a couple of the ultra high value mapping consumables. These being the Prophecy Monstrous Treasure, which I mentioned a bit in my video on high investment mapping. It's a prophecy that actually doesn't do very much on its own, but in conjunction with the Sextant modifier that adds a strongbox to the map, causes strongbox monsters to be enraged, and gives strongbox monsters 500% increased item quantity, it can add a tremendous amount of loot to a map. And those monstrous treasure prophecies can often go from being 10, 12 Chaos Orbs very early in a league, and when I say very early, I do mean day 1, day 2, and then they can go up to 100 Chaos by the end of the first week. So those are another item that's incredibly valuable to pick up. I do also want to look at a few things that are very small money makers, but that I think a lot of people tend to overrate. The first one is leveling gems in your offhand weapons. I do recommend that you do this, but I think most people overemphasize it. You'll notice here that I'm leveling an Enfeeble Curse gem. In this case, I'm actually leveling this because I may decide in the future to use it, but let's just pretend that it was a different skill gem that was more profit focused, like Arc. I would be leveling this with a goal of selling it when it hit level 20, or potentially increasing it to 20 quality, then trying to Varl it into a level 21 gem with 20 quality, which can be a sizable injection of currency when you hit it. You can sell a lot of in-demand 21 level 21 and 20 quality gems for well over an Exalted Orb. You know, you can talk in 250, 300 Chaos Orbs. However, whilst I do recommend you do this, I also don't think it's as lucrative as people say. And the reason for that is that it typically takes 325 million gem XP in order to level a gem. And normally you get about 1.6 million per map if you're running red maps with a moderate amount of additional monsters on the map. So you're running it with at least an alchemy orb to give 4 mods that add pack size to it. So getting this bonus, this injection every 200 maps, whilst it's certainly welcome, it's just not as much as people think. What I would instead suggest you do, if you want to make yourself a bit more currency from the mapping process, is to tighten up your loot filter and pick up less in order to be able to run your maps faster. I've made a video on the loot filter that I use, and basically I hide every currency drop that is an alteration orb or lower. So the lowest that I'll even see is a scouring orb. I hide every single rare item unless it is on such a precious base item that the base item alone is worth currency. So for instance, I will see for instance this, if I drop into the map that I was running before and drop this marble amulet on the ground, you'll notice that comes up as being an item level 84 marble amulet, comes up as something that may have some potential, but all of these rare items, which are all item level 84, so they're not utter trash, all of those rare items are hidden, and that is the case for every single a rare item that is not some sort of special drop. Now, another trick here, and actually you'll be able to see this in action, is that I've found it very, very lucrative in the current economy, and this, I'm not guaranteeing that this will remain the case, to purchase very large quantities of the tower map, roll them up, so apply 4 cartographer's chisels and an alchemy orb, and then to run the ones that have gone unidentified, and just to sell all the ones that have 4 to 6 mods on them. So these are the ones where your Val Orb doesn't have any noticeable effect on it. I've been trying to sell those at 15 Chaos Orbs equivalent, and then I've been selling the ones that go to 8 mods for 21 Chaos Orbs. That's considerable markup, but the big one is the 1 in 16 that Val's up into a Val Temple map. Val Temple map is, although it has fallen quite a bit with a recent patch that was made, it's still more expensive than basically any other tier 16, and it's something that I'm consistently selling for 35 Chaos Orbs at a time. And while I've been recording this, I've sold one, but also during my previous video recording I sold one, and off screen I also sold 2. So it's something that sells pretty consistently. I think I sell about 1 of them an hour, and that's just by having them there. So what I will do is I'll use the tips that I outline in my bulk trading interface video to purchase a very large quantity of tower maps from a player. I will then chisel them all up, alchemy orb them all, Val them all, and then be selective as to what I price each one at. So that's another way of making currency. The last thing that I've used in this league, and this is a trick that is something that may not work in the future. The more widely known this is, the less effective it will be. Early in a league, I look for players that are fighting Uber Elder early, and I purchase their item level 86 helmet drops, no matter how bad the base is. So you'll see here, this is a Silken Hood, a Solaris Circlet, certainly not good bases. I purchase all of them, and then once I've got them all, I will throw enchanted fossils on them. Enchanted fossils are a delve drop that typically at the start of the league are only 3 or 4 Chaos Orbs that will stick a random enchantment onto an item whilst also scrambling the mods on it. So for instance, if you were to use one on this, it would erase the Spectral Shield Throw projectile speed enchant on it, It would also erase all of those mods, those garbage mods, 66% increased energy shield, 17% in maximum life, sorry, 17 maximum life, 1 life regen a second. It would re-roll the mods the same way that Chaos Orb would, and it will also change the enchant to another enchant at random. That enchant is not guaranteed to be an Eternal Labyrinth tier 1. In my experience, it's 50% of the time it's an Eternal Labyrinth enchant, 50% it is a Merciless Labyrinth enchant. I'll keep throwing enchanted fossils onto an item until I get a combination, until I get an enchant that I think is likely to have at least some value to someone. So for instance, you'll see here, Toxic Rain deals 40% increased damage. Toxic Rain I know is a good skill at the moment, although I don't know much about building it. Determination reduced mana reservation. There was a couple of, there's 30% increased spark projectile speed, cold snap damage, spectral throw damage, scorching ray cast speed. All of these are mods that I think might have potential on a helmet to someone. I'm also using a very good example of this, 40% increased arc damage. All of these are item level 86 and Elder Helms for a reason, and that is that, well, one, those helmets are quite cheap. Even early in the league I was paying 10 to 15 chaos for them, and they can roll almost every mod in the game. So they have tremendous potential to improve if a player then decides to craft on them. My next step, once I've got one of these, that's got a good enchant on it. Doesn't need to be an amazing enchant. If it's just a good enchant, I throw it in a 1 Exalt tab. Scourge Arrow has 8% chance to poison per stage. I know Scourge Arrow is meta. I think that's actually the Merciless tier version of this enchant. I'll throw that one in the 1 Exalt tab. If it's considerably better, I'll stick it in a 3 or 4 Exalt tab. And if I get one of the very, very best enchants, then at that time, I will try and craft it further. I have another rule, which is that every time I get a minion enchant that is powerful, I will roll it to try to get... You'll notice here that the very first mod that you see there, Necromancers, plus 3 to the level of socketed minion gems. That's a tremendously powerful mod to anyone that is running some sort of zombie build. And so I feel that's an item that would be of tremendous appeal to someone that's running that sort of build. As a result, I price them as, once more, 1 Exalt if they're an item that is a mediocre enchant, 3 Exalts if it's a great enchant, and if it's a absolute top tier enchant such as Molten Strike fires 2 additional projectiles, then I will price it much, much, much higher. I actually did sell a Molten Strike will fire 2 additional projectiles enchant for 12 Exalts in this league. So that was a big source of big injection of currency, and I have not yet sold it, but I have a 40% Glacial Cascade conversion enchant, which unfortunately would be better on a Shaper Helm than an Elder Helm, but you know, you get what you're given sometimes, and I've been trying to get sort of 7 to 9 Exalts for that. I don't actually think I'll get that, and perhaps I was too greedy early on. But yeah, enchanted fossils are a good way to make currency early in the league. By the middle to late league, they do seem to get much more expensive. Players have twigged that this is an effective way of you know, basically completely avoiding the Eternal Labyrinth grind, and as a result, there's also just a lot more people have their enchanted helmet already, and so it's not as effective now as it was. The last tip, though, that I have, and this is the most important one, is run your maps fast. Running maps quickly is a tremendous way to get 80% of the loot that you could have got in that map in 50% of the time. So you run from start to finish, you only pick up things that are actually good. As I said, I don't have anything under a Scouring Orb up here on my filter, and you just run from the start to finish. If you accidentally leave behind a 6 socket item, well, you leave it behind. You're not going to be gutted by that. And then you just finish that map and you start the next one. And you start the next one and you start the next one. If you're in a position where you can just stick a map in and throw an alchemy orb on it and go, then do that. If you have to look for specific mods that you know you can't beat, then in that case you can roll up a bunch of maps at once and then use the stash tab to hide the mods you can't beat. So for instance, if I was to go to my tab where I'm selling all my spare tower maps, if I could not do reflect, if I was running a build that cannot do reflect maps, then I can quickly search in here, highlight items that have the word reflect in them. Oh, there's a map that I can't do, it's got elemental reflect. There's another map I can't do, it's got elemental reflect. Everything else here, I can be absolutely confident does not have elemental reflect. And so that's a very quick way to check once you've rolled up a whole bunch of maps at once. And the same would be the case if, for instance, the mod that you couldn't do was players cannot regenerate life, mana, or energy shield. There we go, spot these maps. And actually, I really hate this mod. It's not something that I can't do, but it's something that I just really loathe doing on this current character. So it's one that I generally prefer not to run. I can do that and quickly say, okay, those aren't worth doing. Temporal chains is another one that a lot of players absolutely loathe doing. Again, the same principle applies. Temporal chains, temporal chains, temporal chains. I have a general rule that I won't bother doing a map with temporal chains on it unless it has at least 27% pack size. But again, you don't need to copy me on that. That's just the way that I work. So yeah, there's a bunch of the tips that I use in order to go from being a player that had a shortage of currency and for whom a 6 link was a tremendous investment that would basically that would bankrupt me for the league, to putting me in a position where, you know, as I said, I can afford a Headhunter and I can afford to put together builds that don't come together without a 6 link and a bunch of other specific items. If you've got any questions, feel free to ask me below. Otherwise, have a good one.